Well, when you see a guy like Khabib Nurmagomedov just run through people in the UFC and you know where that guy's from, you got to go, well, how many more of those guys are over there?
Why fighters from this part of Russia dominate the world of combat sports. Every historical period has stories of elite soldiers and warriors who used to spread dread and fear throughout the lands. The Spartans, ancient Macedonians, and Romans in the Western civilization, but also the Huns, Mongols, and samurais in the East were just a few examples of many feared warriors who must be avoided at all cost. Speaking of today's perspective, such elite fighters can be found in combat sports like MMA or kickboxing. Some parts of the world particularly produce tough fighters whose reputations exceed them in the ring or the octagon. Such examples are Dutch kickboxers and Brazilian grapplers. But the most feared of them all are the Dagestani fighters, who dominate the combat sports stages worldwide.
It's over. It's over. Leo's out.
It is all over!
Why are these warriors so formidable and good at fighting? What's their secret weapon? How has this region in Russia produced so many elite competitors and world combat sport champions? We'll take a deep dive into this and analyze why the Dagestani fighters are so tough and almost unbeatable.
MMA Fighter Spot? Man, that channel is fucking great.
When Khabib said that he was coming out of crazy mountains, he wasn't joking. And if you can define the Dagestani natural environment with one word, that word would be harsh.
No understand this. Hey, I am different mentality. I am born from crazy mountains.
The mountains cover an area of 25,000 square kilometers, and the average height in the entire territory in Dagestan is 960 meters, about 3,000 feet above the sea level. People are built differently, and their cardio is usually off the limit. Besides the obvious environmental factors and cold winters, Dagestan is a harsh place with endless conflicts between Russian forces and radical militants. Certain types of violence are just a way of life there. Dagestan is in a region that values combat sports, and societal expectations play a significant role in enticing Dagestani men to train in wrestling. Dagestani culture values fighters, just like Austria values classical music performers. For example, if you're a healthy male, the Dagestani mindset is that you should be wrestling. Wrestling is deeply implemented in their genes. Considering that most Dagestanis are devout Muslims, they are not partying or even less drinking alcohol, but rather train all day long. They would wake up early, go hiking, and run across the unforgiving mountain terrain. The harsh conditions contribute significantly to Dagestani fighters being both tough and powerful wrestlers and mentally strong. Most successful Dagestani fighters in MMA. Khabib Nurmagomedov, Islam Makhachev, Magomed, and Goliath are all well-known names in the MMA community. These are just a few of the many. Nevertheless, other UFC fighters like Alibaga Utinov, Umar, and Usman Nurmagomedov, Zabit Magomed Shapirov, and many others coming out of this region are also worth mentioning. Speaking of Khabib, is there a more dominant champion in the history of the UFC? He has never even bled in a fight, much less lost a bout, and some even believe that he never even lost a round, making Chael Sonnen smoke nervously in the corner. Now the UFC has another dominant champion, Islam Makhachev. He became the UFC champion by beating the most feared grappler in the whole UFC, who holds the record for the most submissions and finishes in UFC history, Charles Oliveira. It's not only about how he beat him, but how he did it. He literally defeated him in his own game, submitting him on the ground. At the light heavyweight division, Magomed and Goliath possesses everything to become the undisputed, long-reigning champion of the UFC.
Rifts out the way comfortably.
We know.
Not to mention the now emerging Ikram Aliskerov, who has the potential to dethrone Israel Adesanya from his throne.
And Aliskerov just hurt him.
In the last decade or so, one common sight in mixed martial arts, especially in the UFC, is the increasing number of Dagestani fighters, which leads to the question, why are Dagestani UFC fighters so dominant? The most important aspect of MMA is grappling. If you don't believe me, ask the former boxing champion James Toney, who fought only once in the UFC and it was brutally dominated on the ground by the wrestler Randy Couture.
Against his ear. He's going out.
The short answer to why Dagestani UFC fighters are so successful is that they're exceptionally gifted at wrestling, which has proven to be the core foundation in highly effective martial art and MMA fighting. As a result, the Dagestan fighters have an incredible winning rate of 89% in the UFC. The other martial art that Dagestani fighters train in is the Russian Sambo. Sambo was created as a combination of the most effective martial arts today, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and judo, implementing the best techniques of each of these styles into one superior martial art of Sambo. Combat Sambo, on the other hand, besides grappling techniques, includes strikes and kicking as well, the closest you can get to a real MMA fight. That's the reason why Sambo fighters can quickly emerge and take a transition into the MMA. When you combine Sambo and wrestling, you get the complete product of a deadly arsenal of various throws, sweeps, takedowns, and submissions, techniques that would make any UFC fighter run for his money. We've seen a lot of wrestlers in MMA, but not many of them could implement their game accordingly. If you study American and Russian wrestlers, you'll notice a significant difference in consistency. While the American style of wrestling prefers timing and opportunity to close the distance and shoot for takedowns, the Dagestani style of wrestling is a methodology where a fighter fluidly moves from one move to the next without thinking. The specific of chain wrestling is keeping your opponent on the back foot, constantly moving forward and keeping the pressure by executing one takedown after another. If the first takedown attempt fails, a classic Dagestani wrestler would immediately shoot for another and another until he earns a dominant position where he prefers to be. The most successful UFC fighter coming out of Dagestani, Khabib Nurmagomedov, explained these two styles from his perspective.
You're supposed to ask me what difference between Dagestan wrestling and American wrestling. This is a good question. I think it's big difference. I know you know how to wrestle, but what about wrestling 25 minutes? It's gonna be like I told DC today. Like when you fight with Stipe Miocic last time, you grab his leg one time and you take him down, and he get up very quickly, and that's it, and you finish. And other minutes all going stand up, but
Khabib said, recalling the fight between his close friend Daniel Cormier against Stipe Miocic. But again, me and DC is a big difference. If I try to take him down once, I'm going to do it all night. This is a big difference between US and Dagestan wrestling, elaborated Khabib, who had the perfect opportunity to explore both worlds. Using the chain wrestling style, Dagestani wrestlers are experts at taking their opponents down and putting them on their backs. It's not only about executing a takedown, but about the ability to control the angles while keeping the opponents down, holding them from a top position. And then again, one would ask, why are Dagestani fighters such great wrestlers? That's almost the same thing as asking why SEALs are so good at swimming, because swimming is all they did while growing up. Even though wrestling is not officially the national sport of Dagestan, kids in this part of Russia are raised to be wrestlers. When a newborn child is born in Dagestan, if the baby is judged unfit for future duty as a wrestler, it's most likely abandoned or thrown from a nearby hill. Just kidding. That was in ancient Sparta, but you got the point. Youngsters here are raised up, brought, and tutored to be fighters, as fighting is an essential aspect of Dagestani culture. That's all for today's video about Dagestani fighters. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more content like this, please give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Remember, every subscription gets us one step closer.